The most handsome guy at work bought a date with me. I thought he was just a playboy, but could I be wrong? The entire room, which had been filled with playful laughter and chatter between my coworkers, fell silent in an instant from where I stood at the front of the room. With two of my female coworkers on either side of me, I watched as Isaac walked forward. Megan, my coworker in charge of the event, cleared her throat before speaking into the microphone in her hand. Her voice was projected by a speaker near her feet. "I'm sorry, how much did you bid?" she asked. She sounded just as disbelieving as I felt. She handed the microphone to Isaac, who turned his head slightly so he can make eye contact with me as he spoke. "I bid $1,000, he said, his smooth voice filling the room, "for a date with Avery." More silence, and then everyone burst into cheers. "Way to go, Isaac! Must be nice having a grand to spare, huh?" I stared at Isaac, still doubtful of what I just heard. As a fun way to raise funds, the company management had decided to organize an auction. They picked a handful of us young single employees and had people bid for a date with us. Up until that moment, only a few of my female coworkers had playfully made bids for me, with the highest bidder at that point offering $150. Never would I have thought anyone would offer $1,000 to go on a single date with me, especially not Isaac Russel, the heartthrob of the company who looked like someone had decided to give the phrase tall, dark, and handsome a human form. He was still watching me. Was he enjoying how surprised I was? Quickly, I tried to mask my expression. $1,000, Megan laughed as she took the microphone back from him. Amazing! I didn't think our Avery was that popular. She ignored the glare I sent her. Going once, going twice, and gone. That settles it. Avery Freeman, you owe Mr. Isaac one romantic date. Have fun, you two. Amidst the buzzing excitement of the crowd, Isaac and I locked gazes again. He gave me a smile that would have made anyone blush, nodding once before turning and disappearing back into the crowd. I narrowed my eyes. What did that man have planned? 2 hours later, I stayed behind to help clean up after the event. Sure enough, the people left were all gushing about what had just happened. "I can't believe he just did that," Megan was saying as she scooped plastic cups off the desk and tossed them into the trash bag she was holding. "Where do you even get the balls to pull something like that? That's insane." Across the room, Carmen called out her response as she pulled the decorations off the walls. "We're talking about Isaac here, Meg. If I walked around looking like that, I'd have balls of obsidian." "I didn't even know he liked men," Thomas chimed in as he disconnected the sound system. Well, was he trying to? I could tell it was giving him trouble, so I walked over to give him a hand. He gave me a grateful smile. "Forget that. I didn't even know he liked Avery," Megan exclaimed. At once, everyone in the room looked at me. I sighed and leaned against the broom in my hands. "Don't look at me," I mumbled. "I'm probably more confused than all of you." "You don't look super pleased. Weren't you just complaining about how hard it is to find a good man the other day?" Thomas flashed me a smile. I rolled my eyes. Since Thomas was fine on his own at that point, I resumed my sweeping. "Man, you know words just fall out of my mouth when I'm drunk. And anyway, Isaac hardly counts as a good man." "Oh, come on," Megan chided me. "Isn't that a little harsh? He seems a little full of himself, sure, but he is full of himself." My words came out a little harsher than I intended them to be, but I'd always had a problem with being overly blunt. "Everyone showers him with attention, and he lives for it." "Are you sure you're not just jealous?" Megan teased me like she tended to. "Don't be, you're pretty good looking yourself." "I'm not jealous," I insisted. "I'm just not keen on becoming that guy's latest conquest." "Oh yeah, you guys know each other from college, don't you?" Carmen walked up to us, having finished what she was doing. "You and Isaac?" "That's right," I said, and trust me, he did not make a very good impression. Granted, it had been years since college at that point. When I'd first started working at that company and ran into Isaac, I'd been surprised, especially when I found out how popular he was with the girls and how much he still seemed to enjoy that attention. All I could think was that some things never change. He tried to befriend me a few times, but I had little patience for people like him. With this, it was clear he was determined to get closer to me. But to what end, I wondered. As we finished cleaning up, we all stepped into the reception as we went to leave the building. To our collective surprise, Isaac was still around, chatting with the young receptionist. From the looks of it, he had her blushing down to her neck. Isaac looked towards us as we entered the room. "Ah," he flashed a bright grin as his gaze landed on me. "Just the man I wanted to see." Isaac strolled over to us, the picture of confidence. He had deep, flawless brown skin and long, dark locks braided neatly against his scalp and done up in a firm bun. Looking at him, I couldn't help but admit to myself, Carmen did have a point. I'd probably be dripping with confidence too if my time at the gym granted me a figure like that. I wasn't bad looking myself. I'm around the same height as him with olive-toned skin and black hair. I kept short and neat, but still. "I was hoping to catch you. We need to exchange numbers, no?" "Do we?" I inclined my head as I replied sarcastically. Megan elbowed my back. I ignored her. Isaac's smile became a touch more exasperated. "Avery, come on," he lowered his voice slightly, as if trying to coax me with his tone. "I know we're not the closest, but I really do want to show you a good time. Won't you let me?" "There it is!" Carmen put a hand to her chest and pretended to swoon, laughing. "That killer charm." "He's asking to show you a good time," said Thomas. "Can you really stay your usual cold self when faced with that?" The answer to that question was yes. "We can exchange numbers, and of course, I'll go on the date." My tone was icy as I pulled my phone out. "But let me make one thing clear, Isaac. It doesn't matter how much money you've spent tonight. I don't owe you anything but my time, understand?" Isaac gave me a slightly wounded smile. Of course," he nodded amicably, his expression sweet and obedient. "A little bit of time with you is more than enough for me." This man! I rolled my eyes at his sweet talking as we exchanged numbers. I knew I seemed harsh, but I knew I had to be careful with this guy. After all, I wasn't going to forget what he had done anytime soon. It was Friday night. After parting ways with my friends, I took a bus back to my apartment. By the time I'd taken a shower and gotten into bed, there was a text message from Isaac waiting for me on my phone, asking when would be a good time for our date. I sighed. I really just wanted to enjoy my weekend in a quiet and peaceful way, but it was better to get it done and over with. So, as I lay in bed and pulled on my glasses, having taken off my contacts in the bathroom, I sent him a simple message in response. "Tomorrow night is fun. You can pick where we go." The next day, Isaac settled on a somewhat fancy restaurant in town. Out of curiosity, I looked it up online and found myself a little intimidated by their prices. Between that and the $1,000 he'd spent on his bid, I really couldn't help but wonder, did he have another source of income, or did I need to become a lot more serious about getting a promotion? That evening as I got dressed, I realized that it had been some time since I'd been on a date. I disliked dating apps, and I had been told by my friends that people probably did not approach me because I always looked annoyed about something. Regardless of my dislike for Isaac, I was curious to see where the night would take me. If nothing else, I was going to get a free meal out of it. With that slightly hopeful thought, I pulled on my coat and left my apartment. 30 minutes later, I stepped out of my Uber and spotted Isaac waiting for me by the entrance to the restaurant. He smiled when he spotted me and walked over to greet me. I responded politely and let him lead me inside. It was a Saturday evening, so naturally the restaurant was full of people. Soft music filled the air, and the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling cast the entire room in a nice golden glow. Just looking at the place made my wallet hurt, and I wasn't the one paying. When we were seated, I decided to cut right to the chase. "Care to explain why you're doing all this?" I asked. Isaac laughed. "I haven't even fully sat down yet, Avery." I stared at him without responding. He sighed and sat down, forearms resting on the table. "Do you really have a hard time believing that I just want to take you out to dinner?" he said. "No, I can't believe that. What I'm worried about is what you hope to achieve by doing that. Spending so much money just to take me out? To what end, Isaac?" "Right. You're still angry about what happened back then, aren't you?" he sighed. "Of course I am." Some of the irritation I was feeling finally settled into my voice. "And don't you dare tell me that I should be over it by now. Most people would have called me jaded, and they'd have been right, but I hadn't always been like that. There had been a point in my life when I had been a hopeless romantic, wearing my heart on my sleeve. And then, in college, I made the mistake of falling for the most handsome boy on campus. I mean, it was a long time ago," he said, "but I'm sorry." He gave me a slightly guilty smile. "Still, I didn't think you were the type to hold a grudge." "I wasn't," I said, smiling coldly at him. I wonder what could have changed that. As if on cue, a bubbly waitress appeared at our table to take our orders. This reduced the tension of the situation, but only by a bit. After she had taken our order, she left us alone again. Really, I just think it's a shame, he smiled at me. We were friends back in the day, but now we barely talk to each other even though we work in the same building. I just want to bridge that gap. Is that wrong? I didn't say anything, but I'm sure the expression on my face must have answered his question for him, because he glanced away with another sigh. You told me something similar back then too, I finally responded. I guess I did, Isaac conceded. And it turned out you didn't really care about me at all, I continued. And I'm sorry for that, Avery, truly. What I want to do now is bury the hatchet. Something about his voice and the smile on his face felt so insincere that I was sure he was mocking me. As the waitress arrived with our food, my mind drifted to the past. I had crushed on Isaac in college, like most people, but the college was large and full of people. I knew that there was no way he would notice me, until one day he did. One day he walked up to me and told me plainly that he wanted to be friends with me. Elated and love-struck, I let him into my life. We spent time together and I found myself falling for him. Not only that, I genuinely thought I had a chance too, until one day it came out that Isaac had started to date my best friend at the time, Emily. At around the same time, he found more and more excuses to not hang out with me anymore. Shocked and heartbroken, I couldn't help but wonder if I had misread the situation entirely, until one day, casually, Emily told me something that made it all clear in an instant. Isaac is such a sweet guy, honestly, she said, beaming. He's been trying to get closer to me for ages now. I thought he was just a playboy who'd stick it in anything he could, but after seeing how close you guys got, I figured he couldn't be that bad if you enjoyed being his friend. You're a pretty good judge of people, Avery. That was the day I learned that I was not as good at judging people as I thought. Once Isaac, who I had thought was my friend, had gotten what he wanted out of spending time with me, he had more or less left me out to dry. To say I had been upset would be an understatement. It had been a little over 8 years since we'd graduated, and I would have liked to think Isaac had changed. But the way he enjoyed all the attention people gave him, the way he would flirt and tease just to get a reaction, it told me everything I needed to know. I stared at him as he began to eat his food. He paused to look up at me and send me a warm smile. It didn't matter what he had going on in that head of his, I was going to show him that I was not that easy. I calmed down once I had a plate of food in front of me. The portions were smaller than I would have liked, but it tasted good and I wasn't the one paying, so I wasn't too bothered by it. After dinner, we stepped out of the restaurant together. Do you want to head home? The night's still young, Isaac said to me. He didn't say anything more than that, but his implication was pretty clear. I shot him a cold look. That's my plan. What, did you have something else in mind? I thought we could drink. There's a bar nearby. I can drive us there. I frowned. I really had not planned on doing anything else but dinner. No? Isaac cocked his head. We're still on a date. I'd pay for your drinks. Free drinks after free food? That did sound enticing. But did I really want to get drunk with this guy of all people? I brought my hand up to check my watch. It was just a little past 7 in the evening. The night was still young. Fine, I finally sighed. As soon as the word was out of my mouth, I couldn't help but get the distinct feeling that I would regret this choice, but only because I'm not driving and you're paying. Isaac smiled sweetly. Perfect. With that, he walked me over to his car. 1 hour later. I had always gotten the impression that Isaac was the type to hold his alcohol well, or at least he was the type to know drinking a ton when you were driving was not a good idea. Unfortunately, neither of those things were true. There I sat, only slightly buzzed. Beside me, Isaac, cool, suave, and handsome Isaac, was clearly having trouble seeing straight. He was engaged in conversation with another patron at the bar, and everything the other man said sent Isaac into stitches. I didn't think the conversation was very funny. Then again, I could barely understand it. I couldn't help but think, is this guy really going to drive himself home? Isaac, I tapped his shoulder. It's late. Isaac turned to me, looking at me like he was only just remembering I was still there. Then he glanced down at his wristwatch and his brows raised in surprise. Shoot, you're right, his words were slightly slurred. You want to head home? I can I can call you an Uber. I've got it, I mumbled. Somehow I doubted he would be able to type anything on his phone accurately, much less drive his car. I wanted to leave, but worry pinched at me. Leaving him like this was dangerous. He could get in an accident or something if he attempted to get behind the wheel in this state. As much as I disliked him, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if anything I could have prevented ended up happening to him. Actually, you know what? I grabbed him by the arm and lifted him off his seat, much to his surprise. I'll drive you home. Isaac stared at me in disbelief before laughing. What? Avery, are you worried about me? How sweet. Yes, he really was drunk. Just a few hours ago, he would never have dared to say something like that to my face. Swallowing my irritation, I led him outside and to his car. Fishing the keys from his pocket, I unlocked it and herded him into the passenger seat. Where do you stay? I huffed, climbing into the driver's seat. Isaac was at least sober enough to mumble his address. Barely. Once we reached his home, I stepped out of the car with a sigh. He followed me out, swaying slightly. Here we are, I said with a sigh, pulling my phone out. I'm assuming you're sober enough to get up your stairs. He didn't answer. When I looked over to him, I was shocked to see he had stepped closer. You helped me home, even though you're angry at me, he hummed, please. You're still such a nice guy. Surprised, I blushed by his sudden sentimental tone. What the hell are you talking about? He stepped even closer to me, reaching a hand out to gently hold onto my arm. I really shouldn't have hurt you like that back then, he laughed softly. I was happy when I found out we would be working together, but you don't even look at me most of the time. Seriously, what was he talking about? The whole evening he had been playful, his voice filled with hints of insincerity. Why did he suddenly sound so genuine now that he was drunk? I stared at him, shocked at how close he suddenly was to me. I could smell the drink on his breath. I actually am really sorry about back then, you know? He was staring right at me now. I'm serious about wanting to make it up to you because the truth is, just watching you from afar, I think you're a pretty great guy, Avery. I really want to get to know you better, for real. I stared at him, looking for traces of anything fishy in his words. But no, this was pure, drunken sincerity. He looked so earnest, it was startling. Frankly, I didn't know how to respond. Didn't he just basically confess his attraction to me? Well, I'm happy to know that you feel that way, I said, hoping it didn't show on my face how flustered I felt. But it's going to take more than that to change my assessment of you, you know. To my utter surprise and amusement, Isaac actually looked a little disappointed at that. Sighing, I attempted to shrug his arms off me. He let go, but I pushed him back a little rougher than I had wanted to. Still unsteady on his feet, he stumbled back and then he tripped and fell, cursing as he hit the ground with a heavy thud. Alarmed, I crouched down beside him. Are you alright? I asked. Isaac blinked before attempting to rise to his feet. He was barely able to get up before he gave up, wincing. Mostly, he let out a strained laugh. I don't think I can move my ankle though. And so, my romantic date with my coworker ended with me driving him to the hospital to have a twisted ankle treated. 2 days later. The next Monday, Isaac and I were the talk of the entire office. After all, it was no doubt surprising to see him show up in crutches right after going out on a date with me. He just got drunk and tripped when I was trying to help him, I explained for what felt like the millionth time. You guys are making it sound like I beat him up or something. I wouldn't put it past you, Megan laughed. This was definitely not what I wanted to be talking about during my lunch break. Hey look, Carmen nudged me and nodded towards the door leading into our department. Speak of the devil. Sure enough, when I followed her gaze, I saw Isaac making his way into the room with one crutch under his arm. He sought me out with his eyes before smiling once he spotted me. Frowning, I rose to my feet and walked over. Isaac, what are you doing here? I hissed, just loud enough for only him to hear. You're not supposed to be moving around so much, you're still healing. It's not that bad. The doctor said I'll only need this thing for a few days. Besides, I wanted to talk to you. I glanced back. My nosy coworkers were all doing a very poor job of pretending they weren't trying to listen in on the conversation. I sighed. Fine, I said, but only for a bit. And make sure you use the elevator when you're going back upstairs. Will do, he hummed, letting me take his arm and lead him out into the hallway. In truth, I felt kind of guilty. His own reckless drinking aside, it had been my push that made him fall and get injured. I was happy that he'd come because I wanted to apologize to him. But he beat me to it. Yeah, I just wanted to apologize. Saturday was a mess. While I wouldn't have called it a mess, it certainly didn't go as smoothly as the average date. "Why did you even drink that much?" I asked, folding my arms over my chest and leaning against the wall. "You knew you were going to drive yourself home, didn't you?" I squinted my eyes. "Unless you did that on purpose so I would take you home." Isaac shook his head. "No, of course not. I already knew how drunk I was. I probably would have left my car there and called a cab myself, to be honest. I think I ended up drinking that much because I was nervous." I stared at him in disbelief. "Nervous? What, because of me?" Isaac shrugged and looked away, smiling sheepishly. I was baffled. Either this guy was way more manipulative than I thought, or I had seriously misjudged his intentions. "I made you nervous?" I asked again, seeking confirmation. "I was serious about wanting to apologize to you for how I treated you back then, but from the get-go, it felt like I had failed and you really didn't want anything to do with me." He leaned against the wall beside me, his single crutch limp underneath his arm. "Not that I'm entitled to your forgiveness, but still," he paused. "I used to act as I pleased, without thinking about how my actions might affect other people. It came back to bite me at the end of the day, though. Ended up hurting a lot of people that way. Back then, you were really different." "It's been 8 years," I glanced at him from through the corner of my eye. "Of course I would change." "Yes, I know, but I mean, you were a lot more..." He paused. It sounded like he was trying to think of the best way to make his point without offending me. "I was a lot less unpleasant," I decided to just say it for him. Isaac smiled wryly. "Well, that's one way to put it. So you feel guilty because you're sure you're the reason I changed this much. I appreciate the sentiment, but 8 years is a long time. I've experienced a lot of other things over the years. I'm not brooding over a heartbreak that happened almost a decade ago," I scoffed softly. "My experience with you just taught me to be a little less trusting of everyone I meet is all." Isaac didn't respond. He looked like a kicked puppy. Staring at his expression, I couldn't help but soften slightly. People did say that everyone deserved a second chance, and it was clear to me now that, despite my doubts, Isaac really was trying to make amends. I pushed myself off the wall and turned to face him completely. "But, like I said, I appreciate what you're doing. It looks like I'm not the only one who has changed. So, I'll give you another chance to make it up to me." Isaac looked at me, brows raised in slight surprise. "Wait, really?" "Yes. You're walking with one foot because of me, so I guess I owe you that much." The hopeful expression on his face was amusing. I couldn't help but smile. "You can pick a time and a place. If it's another restaurant, preferably somewhat affordable and not so fancy, I want to eat a proper meal, and I prefer splitting the bill when I go on a date." Isaac's face broke into a wide smile. For someone who is supposed to be injured, he looked suddenly energetic. "We can do that, sure." Then that playful tone returned to his voice as he teased me. "I could have sworn that you could afford a place like that, though." "You mean you aren't rolling in cash, Avery?" I raised an eyebrow at him. "I mean, if you really want to take me back there, I'll go. But if that happens, I might end up letting it slip to a few of my buddies how you were practically clinging to me, begging me for forgiveness last night," I smirked. "I'll look for somewhere else," Isaac said sheepishly. Weeks passed. Even though we had agreed to go on another date, Isaac had to recover first. To show my goodwill, I decided to pay him a few visits as he recovered, just to make sure he was all right. Not that he needed much tending to. He was back on his feet after a little over a week. Our next date was much more casual. We watched a movie at the cinema. Isaac made the mistake of letting me pick what kind. Apparently, he can't handle horror movies very well. I did find out how he got his money. He worked from home alongside his office job. This discovery had me floored. "You certainly don't act like someone who works 2 jobs, I commented. We sat together on a park bench, enjoying the evening breeze and watching the sunset. "Why? Because I don't walk around with a permanent dip between my eyebrows like you?" he teased. When I frowned, he laughed. "There it is!" I rolled my eyes and looked away. "You seem too laid back for that, is what I mean." "Maybe, but the alternative would be to be wound up all the time." "Like I am?" I raised an eyebrow. Isaac smiled innocently. "You said it, not me." I had to admit, I had been relaxed ever since I started spending more time with Isaac. For all his seemingly superficial charm, there was something magnetic and comforting about him. He really had decided to change himself for the better. I figured I could do with a little more spontaneity in my life. "Then I'll wind down." I stood up and dusted off my pants. "It's a Friday night. Are you doing anything after this? Isaac stood up as well. Nope, nothing important anyway. Where do you want to go? Your place, I answered. Isaac blinked in surprise. My place? Really? He chuckled. I frowned again. Don't get any funny ideas. I just want to do you a favor. I've seen your kitchen. It's completely empty. You're just going to order food for dinner, aren't you? Well, I'm not exactly an amazing cook, Avery. There's no use keeping a bunch of ingredients in my kitchen. Then we'll stop at the supermarket first. You'll have to tell me what you want to eat, though. Isaac finally understood what I was getting at. I set off towards the nearest supermarket and he followed alongside me, perfectly content. I had had my doubts, but so far, I really wasn't regretting this second chance, even though Isaac had to sprain his ankle to get it. As time passed and we spent even more time together, it was only a matter of time before Isaac and I started dating. At first, we tried to keep it secret from our coworkers, but with how often Isaac started showing up at our office to see me, it was only a matter of time before word got out. I got teased for it more than I would have liked. After that, every time the company organized a fundraising event, at least a couple of people would clamor for another date auction, just on the off chance that they could find love too, especially after Isaac and I got engaged just a little over a year later. The end. When do you believe a person has earned a second chance? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.